All right. The last concept in psychology that we're going to be taking a look at is the idea of social psychology. Social psychology is not the same as sociology. You can take both classes in college, but they're two different areas. Social psychology looks at a couple of things. One is how we perceive others, how we relate to other people, and how we influence the decisions that other people are making. So it's looking at our individual influence, but it's also looking at how those perceptions of ourselves and of other people influence the way we think about our social interactions and our own cognitive processes. So a lot of it really deals with the effect that society is going to have on the individual. And so as we look at social psychology, that's really what we're exploring is the effect that society is having on an individual and the effect that the individual can have on society. There are a couple of terms to understand as we do this. A social situation is any situation you find yourself in with where you're interacting with other people. Now that sounds really simple, but you know, scientists like to define things, and so that's considered to be a social situation. So anytime that you are in a position to influence other people, or other people are in a position to influence you, that's looked at as being a social situation. Your influence is um, how much impact you're having, or how much impact that situation is having on you. There's actually a little equation here. Don't get too tore up. We're not going to get too far into algebra. But social psychologists believe that behavior is a function of two things, it's the person and the social situation that person is in. So if you remember looking at conditioning and the idea of behavior, social psychologists would look and say you can't really understand or explain a behavior unless you understand the social situation that the individual finds themselves in. So something that they may do in one situation might be completely inappropriate in another, but in the one they find themselves in, you look and say, okay, I think I understand that. We're driven, social psychologists say, by the idea of self-concern, so preserving ourselves. But that can extend. It doesn't just mean the individual. It can also mean your family, friend group, that type of thing. And so social psychologists say our primary concern is a self-concern. So just kind of that little group that we find ourselves in. But people can eventually move to other concerns. So, this would be the idea of, giving to a charity or volunteering your time for a group that is there. It's really interesting to be doing this, and as I'm recording this, obviously we're in this pandemic situation in May of 2020, and it's this idea of kind of balancing out these concerns. Right, this is something that's going on right now. Is we've all been self-isolating, kind of for a long period of time, but you're starting to see people push back against the idea of social distancing and not being able to do things. And really, it's the idea of, well, I want to do this, or I need to make money in my job, or I want to go and participate in this activity versus, well, when you go out, are you taking the chance of infecting other people? And so it's kind of a battle between this self concern and other concern. One of the big things you've got to look at here is the social norm of the society that the behavior is showing up in. And social norms can be different across cultures. In the United States, in places like England, people are very individualistic. And so, individualism, I'm going to do what's best for me, I'm going to take care of myself. What's best for me will eventually be best for everybody. In collective cultures, a lot of times you'll see some of these in Asia and things like that. It's the idea that the society is what's important, or the family group, those sorts of things. You can see these behaviors in different ways. One of the big ones is care for the elderly, things like that. that can be different across cultures. And so it's an interesting one to look at. But again, you're not going to understand where somebody's coming from unless you understand that kind of background, right? If you're coming up to somebody and you're coming at it from an American perspective and very individualistic, you put those ideas onto somebody else who comes from a collectivist culture and society, and you're going to make some bad assumptions about their behavior, why they're doing the things that they're doing. One of the easiest ways to see social psychology at work is in our idea of first impressions. And I think we all can relate to the idea of first impressions. It could be working up the energy to, or working up the courage, I guess, to talk to somebody maybe that you're attracted to, but you haven't had a whole lot of interaction with. Maybe you meet somebody, you guys are at an age where you're meeting people from different schools, or you go on a job interview, something like that. And what social psychologists will tell us is that we really want to put our best foot forward when we're doing this. We try to manage our visual impression. So when you go to those job interviews, a lot of times you dress up, you put on makeup, you shave, you try to put your best visual impression forward. When you go in there, you try to be very polite, respectful, monitor body language when you're dealing with those. Kind of the interesting thing is social psychologists will tell you we try to strive to tell just enough of the truth to create kind of a favorable impression, but we don't want to tell all the truth. One of the things I like best, sometimes in interviews, people will ask you, tell me about your greatest weakness. And people will always say things like, well, I'm too much of a team player, or I care too much about my job, right? You're not wanting to be really open and honest with this complete stranger about why you might not be good at the particular job. And so you say, well, hey, we're going to, I'll try and frame my response in a different way. First impressions can make us want to exaggerate a little bit of who we are or achievement sometimes, and really kind of brush aside the negative things. And so what social psychology tells us, though, is that first impressions are extremely powerful. Once those impressions are set, and it can happen almost instantaneously, it is very hard for us to change those things. And so it is important to try and manage those. And if you know you've made a bad first impression, you got a lot of work in front of you to do that. What can happen, and we'll see this concept a couple of different times as we talk about social psychology, is that first impressions lead to what they call self-fulfilling prophecy. So we make an impression of somebody, and then we use that impression to judge all of their behavior. And so basically they will act that way because we're expecting it, and our own expectations are pushing them in that direction. So I think you're going to find some cool stuff in here, some stuff that will explain some of your interactions with other people and other people's interactions with you. So let's start exploring social psychology.